Sister Saeed. Skip Christmas. Your life's a mess. Then her boyfriend entered my office. Last Christmas, my sister Madison told me to skip family dinner because my life was too messy for her perfect holiday. 3 days later, her supposedly wealthy boyfriend Marcus walked into my bankruptcy law office as a client. The man she bragged about owning multiple businesses was about to lose everything to creditors. But that was just the beginning of discovering how deep her lies went and how perfectly positioned I was to watch her world crumble. Hey everyone. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you love dramatic plot twists involving family betrayal, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories. Trust me, what happens next will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about sibling loyalty. My name is Scarlett, and I should probably start by explaining how I ended up in this position. As a bankruptcy attorney in downtown Seattle, I thought I had seen every type of financial disaster possible. People losing homes, businesses, collapsing entire life savings, vanishing overnight. But I never expected my own family drama to walk through my office door wearing a designer suit and desperation. Madison and I had always been different. She was the golden child who married young, moved to the suburbs, and built what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. I was the workaholic lawyer who chose career over family gatherings, much to our mother's eternal disappointment. Our relationship had been strained for years, but it reached a breaking point during last year's Christmas planning. I had been going through a particularly rough patch. My long-term relationship had ended badly. My caseload was overwhelming, and I was working 16-hour days just to keep my small practice afloat. When Madison called about Christmas dinner, I mentioned I might be late because of a client emergency. Her response still echoes in my head. Scarlett, maybe you should just skip this year. Your life is such a mess right now, and frankly, your negative energy would ruin Christmas for everyone. Marcus and I have some big announcements to make, and we need this to be perfect. The announcements, I later learned, were about their engagement and Marcus's supposed business expansion. Madison spent the entire holiday season posting photos of their lavish lifestyle on social media. Designer handbags, expensive restaurant meals, weekend trips to wine country. Marcus drove a Tesla, wore Rolex watches, and according to Madison, owned 3 successful tech startups. I spent Christmas alone in my office working on cases for people who had lost everything. The irony was not lost on me. 3 months later, on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, my secretary buzzed me about a new consultation. The client had specifically requested an appointment for a complex business bankruptcy case. When I walked into the conference room, I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Marcus sat at my mahogany table, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. The confident swagger I remembered from family photos was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation I recognized in all my clients who were facing financial ruin. He did not recognize me immediately. We had only met twice at family gatherings, and I had deliberately kept a low profile both times. When realization finally dawned on his face, the color drained completely. Scarlett, you are Madison's sister. I maintained my professional composure, though my heart was racing. I am, and you are here because you need a bankruptcy attorney. For the next 2 hours, Marcus laid out the most elaborate financial house of cards I had ever encountered. The 3 successful businesses, all shell companies with massive debt. The Tesla, leased with payments 3 months behind. The designer lifestyle funded entirely by maxed-out credit cards and fraudulent loan applications. But the real bombshell came when he started explaining his various income streams. Marcus had been running investment scams targeting wealthy retirees with promises of guaranteed returns. He had stolen over $200,000 from elderly victims who trusted him with their retirement savings. The FBI was investigating, and criminal charges were imminent. "The worst part," he said, running his hands through his hair, "is that Madison has no idea. She thinks I am this successful entrepreneur. I have been hiding everything from her. The credit card bills, the loan default notices, all of it." I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. My sister, who had spent years making me feel inadequate about my supposedly chaotic life, was engaged to a man who was about to be arrested for elder fraud. "Marcus, I need to be completely transparent with you. Given my relationship to Madison, there could be a conflict of interest here. You might want to consider finding different representation." His eyes filled with panic. "Please, Scarlett. I researched bankruptcy attorneys in the city, and your track record is the best. I cannot afford to start over with someone new. The federal prosecutors are breathing down my neck. I need help now." The ethical implications were complex, but not insurmountable. As long as Madison was not financially involved in his businesses, I could represent him. And something told me she was completely in the dark about his real situation. "All right, I will help you. But I need complete honesty about everything. Every debt, every asset, every questionable transaction. If I discover you have lied to me about anything, I will withdraw from your case immediately." Over the following weeks, I dove deep into Marcus's finances. What I discovered was worse than I had initially thought. He had been forging documents, creating fake business partnerships, and using his relationship with Madison as social proof to gain the trust of his victims. Several elderly couples had invested their entire life savings based on his claims about his successful businesses and his engagement to a woman from a respectable family. The most disturbing revelation came when I found email exchanges between Marcus and one of his victims, an 80-year-old widow named Eleanor. He had convinced her to liquidate her late husband's pension to invest in his fake tech startup. In the emails, he specifically mentioned his fiancée's family connections and how they had vouched for his business acumen. Madison had unknowingly become part of his con game. As I prepared his bankruptcy filing, I realized I held the power to expose everything. Marcus's criminal behavior, his financial lies, and most importantly, the truth about the perfect life Madison had been flaunting for months. The sister who had deemed my life too messy for Christmas was about to discover that her own life was built on a foundation of fraud and deception. The question was not whether to tell her the truth, but when and how. Marcus's federal court date was approaching, and once the criminal charges became public record, Madison would find out anyway. But I had advance knowledge, and with it came the opportunity for something I had never expected: revenge served on a silver platter. The woman who had made me feel like a failure was about to learn that her supposedly successful fiancé was facing federal prison time for stealing from senior citizens. And I was the one person in the world who could control how that information came to light. The next few weeks were a masterclass in professional compartmentalization. By day, I worked diligently on Marcus's bankruptcy case, filing the necessary paperwork and negotiating with creditors. By night, I lay awake, planning how to handle the inevitable explosion when Madison discovered the truth. Marcus grew increasingly desperate as his court date approached. During our meetings, he would break down crying, begging me to find some way to keep the criminal charges quiet until after his wedding. Madison had already sent save-the-date cards for a summer ceremony at an expensive vineyard resort. The venue alone cost more than most people's annual salary. "She has been planning this wedding for months," he pleaded during one particularly pathetic session. "Her entire family is flying in. Her mother already bought her dress for the ceremony. If this comes out now, it will destroy everything." I maintained my professional demeanor while internally marveling at the irony. The man who had stolen retirement funds from elderly victims was worried about disappointing his fiancée. The same fiancé who had told me my life was too messy for Christmas dinner. Marcus, you understand that federal criminal charges are public record, right? Once the prosecutors file the paperwork, anyone can access it, including Madison. His face crumpled. Is there any way to delay the charges? Maybe if I cooperate fully, they might wait until after the wedding. I knew this was wishful thinking, but I did not crush his hopes immediately. Instead, I focused on gathering more information about the scope of his crimes. Each new detail made the situation worse. He had stolen from a total of 12 victims ranging in age from 65 to 91. The total amount exceeded $400,000. One victim, a 78-year-old man named Robert, had mortgaged his paid-off home to invest in Marcus's fake company. When the promised returns never materialized, Robert faced foreclosure. His adult children had to pool their resources to save their father's house, draining their own retirement savings in the process. As I read through victim impact statements, my conflicted feelings about family loyalty began to solidify into something harder determination to see justice served. This was not just about Madison's condescending attitude toward my life choices. This was about vulnerable elderly people who had trusted the wrong person with their financial security. I started making subtle inquiries about the prosecution timeline. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case, Janet Morrison, had a reputation for being thorough and uncompromising. When I contacted her office to discuss plea arrangements, she made it clear that Marcus would be arrested within the month. "Miss Rivera," she said during our phone conversation, "your client stole from some of the most vulnerable members of our community. We have elderly victims who can no longer afford their medications because of his actions. There will be no delays, and there will be no plea deal that does not include significant prison time." I hung up the phone, knowing that Marcus's wedding plans were about to become irrelevant. But more importantly, I realized I had an opportunity to ensure Madison learned the truth in the most impactful way possible. That evening, I received a text message from my mother. "Madison wants to invite you to her engagement party next month. She feels bad about the Christmas thing and wants to make amends. Will you come?" The engagement party. I had heard about it through family gossip, but had not expected an invitation. Madison was planning an elaborate celebration at the country club where our parents were members. She had hired a professional photographer, arranged for catering from the most expensive restaurant in town, and invited over 100 guests. I stared at the text message for a long time before responding. "I would love to attend. Tell Madison I am looking forward to celebrating their happiness." Over the next week, I formulated a plan that would allow justice to unfold naturally, while ensuring Madison experienced the full impact of her fiancé's deception. The federal prosecutors had scheduled Marcus's arrest for the day before the engagement party. Once he was in custody, the charges would become public record. I could simply let events unfold organically, but that felt too passive. Madison needed to understand the depth of Marcus's deception, and more importantly, she needed to face the consequences of her own superficial values. The sister who had judged my life based on external appearances was about to learn that her perfect relationship was built on lies and criminal activity. I began documenting everything: copies of the bankruptcy filings, victim impact statements, evidence of Marcus's fraudulent business claims, and the timeline of his criminal activity. Not to violate attorney-client privilege, but to ensure I had a complete picture when the truth inevitably came out. Marcus continued to deteriorate during our meetings. He had stopped showering regularly, his hands shook constantly, and he jumped at every unexpected sound. The weight of his crimes was crushing him, but what seemed to terrify him most was Madison's reaction. "She talks about our future constantly," he confessed during one session. "The house we are going to buy the children We will have the business empire we will build together. She has no idea that I will be lucky to avoid a 20-year prison sentence. Have you considered telling her the truth before she finds out from the news? I asked, though I already knew he would never have the courage. I cannot. She will leave me, and I will lose the only good thing in my life. Maybe if I can get through this bankruptcy, I can find a way to make the criminal charges disappear too. His delusion was complete. Marcus truly believed he could somehow escape the consequences of stealing $400,000 from elderly victims. The man who had convinced my sister he was a successful entrepreneur could not accept that his house of cards was about to collapse completely. I spent the next few days researching the victims more thoroughly. I wanted to understand exactly who had been hurt by Marcus's actions. What I found broke my heart and solidified my resolve. Eleanor, the 80-year-old widow, had been forced to move in with her daughter after losing her savings. Robert, who had mortgaged his house, was now working part-time at a grocery store to make ends meet. Another victim, a retired teacher named Margaret, could no longer afford her heart medication. These were not wealthy investors who could absorb financial losses. These were people living on fixed incomes who had trusted Marcus with money they could not afford to lose. And he had used his relationship with Madison as part of his con game, specifically mentioning his fiancée's family reputation to gain their trust. The engagement party was exactly 2 weeks away. Marcus's arrest was scheduled for the day before. Everything was falling into place for the most dramatic family revelation in our family's history. The irony of spending my days helping Marcus navigate his bankruptcy while knowing he was about to be arrested was not lost on me. Each meeting felt like a performance where I played the role of dutiful attorney while he played the role of reformed man trying to make amends. Neither of us was being entirely honest, but for very different reasons. As the date of his arrest approached, Marcus became increasingly unhinged. He started calling me at all hours with desperate schemes to avoid prosecution. Could he flee to a country without an extradition treaty? Could he claim mental illness? Could he somehow pin the blame on a business partner who did not exist? Marcus, I said during one particularly frantic phone call at 11 p.m., you need to accept reality. You stole money from elderly people. The FBI has evidence. There is no escape from this. But Madison, he whispered, and I could hear him crying. She will never forgive me. Her family will destroy me. Her father has connections. He could make my life even worse. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Madison's father was a retired insurance adjuster whose biggest connection was his golf buddy, who owned a small accounting firm. The idea that he could somehow influence a federal prosecution was absurd, but it revealed how little Marcus truly understood about my family despite planning to marry into it. While Marcus spiraled into panic, I used my professional network to gather more information about the prosecution. Janet Morrison, the federal prosecutor, was known for her meticulous preparation and her particular passion for cases involving elder abuse. When I mentioned that I was representing Marcus in the bankruptcy proceedings, she was happy to share details about the criminal case. This guy is a piece of work, she told me over coffee near the courthouse. He specifically targeted widows and retirees because he thought they would be less likely to report fraud quickly. He used fake business documents, forged references, and even created fake news articles about his supposed success to convince these people to invest. Fake news articles? I asked, though I was not entirely surprised. Complete fabrications. He paid some content farm to write articles about his tech companies and their supposed partnerships with major corporations. Then he would show these articles to potential victims as proof of his legitimacy. We found dozens of them on his computer. This revelation added another layer to Marcus's deception. Madison had probably seen these fake articles and believed they were legitimate proof of his business success. Her social media posts often included screenshots of news articles about Marcus's companies. She had been sharing fraudulent content without knowing it, becoming an unwitting accomplice in his con game. I spent that evening reviewing Marcus's social media history, which I had subpoenaed as part of the bankruptcy case. What I found was a carefully constructed fantasy designed to support his criminal enterprise. Photos of expensive meals charged to business credit cards that were funded by victim investments. Pictures of luxury cars that were leased through shell companies. Even photos of him at business conferences that were actually real estate seminars where he was recruiting new victims. Every aspect of the lifestyle that Madison had been showing off to our family was built on stolen money from vulnerable elderly people. The deeper I dug, the more disgusted I became. Marcus had not just stolen money. He had systematically destroyed the financial security of people who had worked their entire lives to build modest nest eggs. Eleanor, the widow, who had invested her late husband's pension, had been married for 52 years before her husband died of cancer. The money Marcus stole was supposed to last her the rest of her life. I decided it was time to contact some of the victims directly. As Marcus's attorney in the bankruptcy case, I had the right to speak with creditors about the proceedings. But my real motivation was to understand the full impact of his crimes. Eleanor agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near her daughter's house, where she had been forced to move after losing her savings. She was a tiny woman with perfectly styled silver hair and hands that shook slightly from arthritis. When she talked about Marcus, her voice remained steady, but her eyes filled with tears. "He was so charming," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "He talked about his fiancée and how much he loved her. He showed me pictures of her at family gatherings. She looked like such a nice girl from a good family. That made me trust him more." My stomach clenched. Pictures of his fiancée. Oh yes, he was very proud of her. He said she came from a family of professionals and that her sister was a successful lawyer. He said the family had done their due diligence on his businesses and fully supported their relationship. I felt sick. Marcus had specifically used my professional reputation and my family's middle-class respectability as part of his con game. Eleanor had invested her money partly because she believed my sister came from a trustworthy family and that our supposed endorsement of Marcus meant his businesses were legitimate. Robert, the man who had mortgaged his house, told a similar story when I met with him the following day. Marcus had shown him photos from family gatherings and talked about how his fiancée's parents had welcomed him into their family business discussions. None of this was true, of course. Madison's parents barely tolerated Marcus and had never discussed business with him beyond polite small talk. I thought if a family of professionals trusted him with their daughter, I could trust him with my money, Robert explained. Now I am 78 years old and working 20 hours a week bagging groceries to keep my house. By the end of that week, I had spoken with 8 of Marcus's victims. Every single one mentioned how his relationship with Madison had influenced their decision to invest. They trusted him because they believed he came from a good family who had vetted his business claims. The weight of this knowledge was overwhelming. Madison was not just an innocent victim of Marcus's deception. Her relationship with him had been weaponized against vulnerable elderly people. Her social media posts showing off their expensive lifestyle had provided legitimacy for his fraudulent business claims. Without meaning to, she had become a crucial part of his con game. I realized that simply watching Marcus get arrested and letting Madison discover the truth organically was not enough. She needed to understand how her own behavior had contributed to the harm done to his victims. The sister who had deemed my life too messy for Christmas needed to confront the fact that her picture-perfect relationship had been built on the financial ruin of senior citizens. But I also knew that confronting Madison directly would be futile. She would become defensive, blame Marcus entirely, and refuse to acknowledge her own role in legitimizing his criminal enterprise. Instead, I needed to let the truth unfold in a way that would force her to confront the reality of what she had been celebrating. The engagement party was now just over a week away. Marcus's arrest was scheduled for the day before. I had copies of all the relevant court documents, victim impact statements, and evidence of how Madison's relationship had been used to defraud elderly people. More importantly, I had made a decision about my role in what was about to happen. I would not be a passive observer watching my family drama unfold. I would be an active participant, ensuring that justice was not just served, but understood by everyone who had been affected by Marcus's crimes. The sister who had made me feel inadequate about my supposedly chaotic life was about to learn that her perfect relationship was the most destructive mess our family had ever encountered. And unlike my messy but honest life, her mess had caused real harm to innocent people. The stage was set for the most dramatic family confrontation in our history. But this time, I would not be the one left out in the cold. The call came at 6:15 in the morning, 2 days before Madison's engagement party. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, and when I answered, a panicked voice whispered my name. "Scarlett, they are here. The FBI is at my apartment. They have a warrant." Marcus's arrest was happening earlier than expected. Through the phone, I could hear authoritative voices in the background, the sound of drawers being opened, papers rustling. The federal agents were executing a search warrant while simultaneously placing him under arrest. "I need you to come down to the federal building," Marcus pleaded. "They are reading me my rights, but I need my attorney present for any questioning." Within an hour, I was sitting in a sterile conference room at the federal building watching Marcus face the full weight of his crimes. The FBI had built an airtight case. They had bank records showing the flow of victim money through his shell companies, recorded phone conversations where he made false promises to elderly investors, and digital evidence of the fake business documents he had created. Special Agent Patricia Walsh laid out the charges with clinical precision. Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and elder abuse. Each count carried significant prison time, and with 12 victims involved, Marcus was looking at potentially decades behind bars. "Your client ran a sophisticated criminal enterprise targeting vulnerable senior citizens," Agent Walsh explained. "He used fake business credentials, forged documents, and manipulated personal relationships to gain the trust of his victims. This was not a crime of opportunity. It was a calculated, systematic fraud." Marcus sat slumped in his chair, finally comprehending that his house of cards had completely collapsed. When Agent Walsh mentioned that they had seized his phone and computer, his face went completely white. "The wedding photos," he whispered. "Madison does not know any of this. She thinks I am at a business conference this week." Agent Walsh exchanged glances with the prosecutor. "Mr. Torres, your personal relationships are not our concern. Our focus is on obtaining justice for the elderly victims you defrauded." After the formal booking process, I accompanied Marcus to his arraignment. The federal judge set bail at $500,000, an amount Marcus could never hope to raise given his bankruptcy status. He would remain in federal custody until trial. As we left the courthouse, Marcus grabbed my arm desperately. "You have to tell Madison before she sees it on the news. Please, Scarlett. She deserves to hear it from someone who cares about her." The irony was not lost on me. The man who had systematically lied to my sister for months was now asking me to deliver the truth he had been too cowardly to tell himself. But I had already decided how this revelation would unfold. "Marcus attorney-client privilege prevents me from discussing your legal situation with anyone including Madison. She will have to learn about this through official channels." That evening, the local news ran a story about Marcus's arrest. The headline read, Local entrepreneur charged with defrauding elderly investors of $400,000. The story included his photo details about his fake businesses and information about the victims who had lost their life savings. Madison's world was about to explode, and she had no idea it was coming. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Madison's number appeared on my screen, but when I answered, I could barely understand her through the sobbing. "Scarlett, something terrible has happened. Someone with Marcus's name was arrested yesterday for some kind of financial crime. It has to be a mistake. Maybe someone stole his identity. He's at a business conference in Portland. He texted me yesterday morning." I took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would change my sister's life forever. "Madison, where exactly did you see this news story?" "It was on the Channel 7 website. Mom sent me the link because she was concerned. But it cannot be our Marcus. The man they arrested is some kind of criminal who steals from old people. Our Marcus owns 3 successful companies. He drives a Tesla. He bought me this engagement ring that cost more than most people make in a year. The Tesla that was 3 months behind on lease payments. The engagement ring that was purchased with money stolen from Eleanor, the 81-year-old widow. The successful companies that existed only on paper and in fake news articles. Madison, I think you need to try calling Marcus directly. If this is really a case of mistaken identity, he should be able to clear it up immediately." I listened as she dialed his number on speakerphone. The call went straight to a recorded message. "The number you have dialed is not available. If this is an emergency, please contact your local authorities." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's breathing became rapid and shallow as the first cracks appeared in her perfect reality. "That does not make sense," she whispered. "His phone is never off. He runs 3 businesses. People need to reach him constantly." "Madison, I need you to sit down. There are some things about Marcus that you do not know." Over the next hour, I walked my sister through the basics of Marcus's criminal enterprise. I explained the fake businesses, the fraudulent investment scheme, and the elderly victims who had lost their retirement savings. I told her about the federal charges and the likelihood of significant prison time. What I did not tell her was that I had been Marcus's bankruptcy attorney for months. That detail would come later, when she was better equipped to handle the full scope of the deception that had surrounded her. Madison's initial response was complete denial. "You are wrong. Someone is framing him. Marcus would never hurt elderly people. He volunteers at the senior center. He brings flowers to my grandmother every week." But as the day progressed, and more details emerged in the news coverage, denial gave way to shocked acceptance. The photos of Marcus in handcuffs were unmistakably real. The federal charges were public record. The victims were real people with real names who had lost real money. By evening, Madison had entered a state of catatonic shock. She sat in her living room, surrounded by wedding planning materials, staring at engagement photos that now looked like evidence in a criminal case. "The engagement party is tomorrow," she said in a monotone voice. 120 people are coming. The country club has already prepared the food. The photographer is already paid. Madison, you need to cancel the party. You cannot celebrate an engagement to a man who is in federal custody for elder fraud. She looked at me with hollow eyes. But what will I tell people? How do I explain that my entire life for the past 2 years has been a lie? The answer to that question would determine whether Madison learned anything from this experience or simply became another victim of Marcus's crimes. The woman who had deemed my life too messy for Christmas was about to discover that her own life had been built on a foundation of stolen money and deliberate deception. Tomorrow's engagement party would become something entirely different, a public reckoning with the consequences of valuing appearances over substance. The morning of what should have been Madison's engagement party dawned gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself was mourning the death of her perfect life. I arrived at her house at 8 a.m. to find her still in the same clothes from the previous day, surrounded by unopened wedding magazines and untouched plates of food that well-meaning neighbors had dropped off. "I cannot call 120 people," she said, without looking up from the coffee table covered in guest lists and vendor contracts. "How do I tell my college roommates that my fiancé is a federal criminal? How do I tell Dad's golf buddies that the man they welcomed into their circle steals money from senior citizens?" I sat down across from her, noting how different she looked without the carefully applied makeup and designer clothes that had become her armor over the past 2 years. Stripped of the superficial trappings of her fake, perfect life, Madison looked smaller, younger, and more vulnerable than I had seen her in years. "You tell them the truth," I said gently, "that you were deceived by someone you trusted, and that you are canceling the party out of respect for his victims." She laughed bitterly. "His victims? Do you know what the worst part is? I posted about him constantly. I tagged him in photos at expensive restaurants. I bragged about his business success to anyone who would listen. I made him look legitimate to the entire world." This was the opening I had been waiting for, but I proceeded carefully. "Madison, what exactly did you know about Marcus's businesses?" "I knew he owned 3 tech startups. I knew he had partnerships with major corporations. I knew he was expanding internationally." She paused, her voice becoming smaller. "But now that I think about it, I never actually visited any of his offices. He always said they were in temporary spaces while he was negotiating permanent leases." "Did you ever meet any of his business partners or employees?" "He said they were all remote workers. He said modern businesses do not need traditional office spaces." Madison covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, Scarlett, I believed everything he told me because I wanted it to be true. I wanted to be the sister who had figured out life, who had found success and happiness while you were struggling with your career." The admission hung in the air between us. For the first time in our adult lives, Madison was being completely honest about the competition that had driven a wedge between us for years. My phone buzzed with a text from our mother. "Should I still come help set up for the party today? Madison is not answering her phone." "Mom is on her way over," I told Madison. "You need to decide how much to tell the family before they hear it from someone else." Madison's face crumpled. "They are going to say they never trusted him. They are going to say they saw red flags that I ignored. And they will be right." Over the next hour, our parents arrived, followed by our aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had planned to help with party preparations. The living room filled with concerned family members who had only heard fragments of the story through hurried phone calls and social media rumors. Madison's breakdown was complete and devastating. Between sobs, she explained Marcus's arrest, the federal charges, and the cancellation of both the engagement party and the upcoming wedding. She showed them the news articles, the court documents, and the photos of Marcus in handcuffs that had been circulating online. Our father sat in stunned silence, processing the fact that he had welcomed a federal criminal into family gatherings and had been prepared to walk that same criminal down the aisle. Our mother alternated between comforting Madison and expressing outrage at Marcus's deception, but it was our grandmother Eleanor's contemporary at 83 years old who delivered the most devastating blow. "Madison, sweetheart, I need you to understand something. Men like Marcus do not just steal money. They steal dignity, security, and peace of mind from people who have worked their entire lives to build modest savings. If he could lie to you about everything for 2 years, imagine how easily he manipulated those poor seniors who trusted him." Madison looked up at our grandmother with tear-swollen eyes. "I know, Grandma. I know it is terrible what he did to those people." "Do you, though? Do you really understand? Because right now you are crying about your canceled engagement party and your ruined reputation." But somewhere in this city, there is an elderly woman who cannot afford her heart medication because Marcus stole her money. There is an elderly man working part-time at 78 years old because Marcus convinced him to mortgage his paid-off house. The room fell silent. Our grandmother, usually the most gentle and diplomatic family member, had delivered a harsh but necessary reality check. I am not trying to be cruel, Madison, but you spent 2 years showing off a lifestyle that was built on stolen money from people like me. You posted photos of expensive dinners that were paid for with some widow's life savings. You bragged about a man who was destroying the financial security of senior citizens. Madison's tears stopped abruptly, replaced by a look of dawning horror. I did not know. I swear I had no idea where the money was coming from. Of course you did not know the specifics, our grandmother continued. But did you ever ask questions when his explanations did not make sense? Did you ever wonder why a successful businessman never seemed to actually work? Did you ever think it was strange that he could afford a lifestyle most entrepreneurs cannot maintain? The questions hung in the air like accusations. Madison had been willfully blind to red flags, because acknowledging them would have meant giving up the fantasy of her perfect life. I watched my sister grapple with the realization that her ignorance had not been innocent. She had chosen not to look too closely at Marcus's finances because the truth might have interfered with the image she wanted to project to the world. What do I do now? Madison asked, her voice barely a whisper. How do I make this right? Our grandmother's expression softened slightly. You start by taking responsibility for your own choices. You acknowledge that your need to appear successful blinded you to warning signs that might have protected others. And then you figure out how to use this experience to become a better person. As family members gradually left to call their friends and cancel their party plans, Madison and I found ourselves alone in her living room. The engagement photos that had been displayed prominently on every surface now looked like evidence of a crime. Scarlett, Madison said quietly, I owe you an apology, not just for the Christmas comment, but for years of making you feel like your life was inadequate compared to mine. I was so desperate to prove that I had everything figured out that I lost sight of what actually mattered. It was the first genuine apology my sister had ever given me, but it was also just the beginning of the reckoning she would have to face as the full scope of Marcus's crimes became public knowledge. 3 months after Marcus's arrest, I sat in the federal courthouse watching him receive his sentence. 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 18 years. The judge had been particularly harsh, noting that Marcus had shown no remorse and had continued trying to manipulate people even after his arrest. Madison sat beside me in the gallery, holding the hand of Eleanor, the 81-year-old widow, whose pension Marcus had stolen. Over the past few months, my sister had undergone a complete transformation that none of us had expected. The day after the canceled engagement party, Madison had called me with an unusual request. She wanted to meet Marcus's victims personally to understand the full impact of his crimes and to see if there was any way she could help repair the damage. I had been skeptical at first, worried that she was simply looking for a way to absolve herself of guilt. But Madison's commitment to making amends proved genuine and sustained. She liquidated her savings account, sold her engagement ring, and used the money to create a fund for Marcus's victims. The amount was modest compared to what they had lost, but it covered Eleanor's medication costs for a year and helped Robert avoid foreclosure on his house. More importantly, Madison had spent countless hours with each victim listening to their stories and learning about the lives that Marcus had disrupted. She volunteered at the senior center, where several of his victims lived, helping with technology classes and social activities. She had transformed from someone who valued appearances above substance into someone who understood the importance of genuine human connection. I was so focused on looking successful that I forgot to actually be a good person, Madison told me over coffee one morning. Marcus was able to fool me because I wanted to be fooled. I wanted the fairy tale life so badly that I ignored every warning sign. The federal prosecutor, Janet Morrison, had been impressed by Madison's efforts to help Marcus's victims. During the sentencing hearing, she specifically mentioned Madison's volunteer work and financial contributions as examples of how communities could support elder abuse victims. After the sentencing, Eleanor approached Madison with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for showing me that not everyone in your generation is like Marcus. Your friendship has meant more to me than you know." Watching my sister embrace this elderly woman she had met through such terrible circumstances, I realized that Marcus's crimes had inadvertently revealed something important about both our family and our individual characters. Under pressure, when everything fake was stripped away, Madison had chosen to become someone better. Our family dynamics had also shifted dramatically. The Christmas gathering that year was smaller, quieter, and infinitely more meaningful than the performance Madison had been orchestrating in previous years. Instead of showcasing expensive gifts and social media-worthy decorations, we focused on spending time together and supporting Madison through her ongoing legal and emotional challenges. Marcus's criminal trial had dragged on for months, requiring Madison to testify about their relationship and her knowledge of his business activities. The defense attorney had tried to paint her as a knowing accomplice, a strategy that backfired spectacularly when the prosecution presented evidence of her victim outreach work and financial contributions. Madison Rodriguez was deceived just as surely as the elderly victims, Janet Morrison had argued. The difference is that when she learned the truth, she chose to take responsibility and help repair the damage rather than making excuses or disappearing. The media attention had been intense, but largely sympathetic to Madison once her volunteer work became public knowledge. Several news outlets ran follow-up stories about her efforts to help Marcus's victims, framing her as an example of how people can choose growth over victimhood when faced with devastating betrayal. My own role in the story had remained largely private. I never disclosed that I had been Marcus's bankruptcy attorney, maintaining attorney-client privilege even after his conviction. Only Madison knew the full extent of my advance knowledge about Marcus's crimes, and she had never asked why I had chosen to let events unfold rather than warning her directly. "I think I understand why you did not tell me immediately," she said one afternoon as we walked through the park where we used to play as children. "I would not have believed you. I would have accused you of jealousy or professional misconduct. I had to discover the truth for myself before I could accept it." She was right. If I had confronted Madison directly with evidence of Marcus's crimes, she would have defended him and attacked me. The shock of learning the truth organically combined with the public nature of his arrest had been necessary to break through her denial and force genuine self-reflection. The experience had also changed my own perspective on family success and the choices we make about what to value in life. My small law practice, which Madison had once dismissed as evidence of my failure to achieve conventional success, had given me the skills and position necessary to help elderly fraud victims seek justice. The messy, imperfect life she had deemed inappropriate for Christmas dinner had actually been more meaningful than her carefully curated fantasy. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, Madison moved out of the suburban house they had shared and into a modest apartment closer to downtown. She found work at a non-profit organization that provided legal assistance to senior citizens, using her experience with Marcus's victims to help others navigate the aftermath of financial abuse. "I spent so many years trying to build the perfect life that I forgot to build a meaningful life," she told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Now, I wake up every morning knowing that my work actually helps people instead of just making me look good on social media." The transformation was not always easy. Madison struggled with depression and anxiety as she processed the reality of how thoroughly she had been deceived. She attended therapy, joined a support group for family members of criminals, and slowly rebuilt her sense of self around values that could not be stolen or revealed as fraudulent. Our relationship, meanwhile, had become closer than it had been since childhood. The competitive dynamic that had poisoned our interactions for years had been replaced by mutual respect and genuine affection. Madison no longer needed to prove her superiority, and I no longer felt defensive about my unconventional choices. As I watched my sister testify at victim impact hearings and volunteer at community events, I realized that Marcus's crimes had ultimately revealed the best in her character rather than the worst. The crisis had forced her to examine her values, acknowledge her mistakes, and choose who she wanted to become going forward. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become opportunities for the most profound growth. Madison's perfect life had been built on lies, but her imperfect recovery was built on truth, compassion, and a genuine commitment to making amends for her role in legitimizing a criminal's facade. What started as a story about family rivalry and holiday drama had become something much more meaningful, a testament to the possibility of redemption, the importance of taking responsibility for our choices, and the power of choosing substance over appearance when everything else falls away. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone you trusted completely turned out to be living a lie that affected innocent people? How do you think you would handle discovering that your perfect relationship was built on criminal activity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story of family karma and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama stories. Share this with anyone who needs a reminder that sometimes the most painful truths lead to the most meaningful transformations. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most challenging and ultimately rewarding experiences of my life. Remember, when appearances crumble, character is what remains, and sometimes losing everything fake is the only way to build something real.